friends, I wrote out some notes in case I can't think of what I want to say, but I'll start just by talking. I want to say that the first time I came to La Jolla Friends was when Jenny, or Elizabeth, was a brand new baby. And I came here just with her. I left the other 3 children with a friend. And walked down the sidewalk there, and Olivia Davis met me. She was a lovely woman, with a pretty blue dress on and her blue eyes, and her gray hair piled on her head. And she told me that there was a family hour before meeting for worship. And at that time, the piano was in the where the first day school is. And so Olivia then ran the family hour, and people, the children in family hour sat in little chairs close to the piano, and then the adults sat back a little bit, and sang songs, hymns, and some songs that aren't really hymns, but sort of have a Quaker feel to them. And then she turned and she asked the children if they had anything to share. And the children, things like my brother fell off his skateboard and he had to have a big Band-Aid on his knee. And Olivia just paid such attention to that, how did everybody feel, what, just all the details. And then anything the children told, she just respected them and listened, so forth. And then she had asked me what the baby's name was. And so then she had everybody sing happy birthday to the baby. And that was just so welcoming and such a feeling, And then I went to the meeting, and afterwards, as I was walking down the sidewalk beside the meeting house, I looked down at the baby. Wow, happy birthday. It just was great. And, and then that led me to when I picked up my other children for my friend gave me a gift for the baby, and she gave me a card that had the Desiderata on it, which says a lot of things, but some of the words are so nice. It says, "You are a child of the universe, no less than a tree and the stars, and you have a right to be here." And so when we went home, I had the other kids do a little art thing. I gave them each paper and paints, and I took paint, and I wrote out those words. And the kids, like Tiffer being 6, he painted a picture of a man with his arms outstretched, just like welcoming, and there was a tree in the sun, and then, Becky did her little 4-year-old picture, and Amy at age 2 just splattered some paint. But those were the welcoming to Liz. But it was the beginning of me coming to this meeting, and that has been now for almost 40 years. Come this summer, it'll be 40 years that I've been coming to the meeting. And so this was not the first Quaker meeting I ever attended, however. The first time I went to a Quaker meeting was in Bethesda, Maryland, and the meeting was at Sidwell Friends. And my husband at that time was at the NIH, and a woman that I knew, her husband was at the NIH also. And so for 2 years, while we were in Washington area, Bethesda's in the Washington, D.C. area, I attended the Friends meeting at Bethesda, and sometimes went down into Washington to that meeting. And this was in 1968, 69, and 70, and so it was the time of the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War protests. And I so many of the messages, especially in Washington, they were political kind of messages, statements against war, and positive things about civil rights. So I really liked it. And I remember the first meeting I went to, I remember the man who stood and spoke, and he was kind of a big man with gray hairs, or old, but he had on a plaid flannel shirt. And I had never been in a church where men didn't have on suits and ties. And also the meeting was just on chairs in a room instead of a formal church. And so I just kind of noticed that, and then I loved what the man said. And I felt so right, and just really liked Friends. Were liked Quakers from that moment on. Well, before that, I want to talk about my early childhood, religious things, because I think the childhood experiences have set me up to the place where I am in my spiritual journey now. And that is that, I was born in 1941, and the U.S. entered World War II about 6 weeks later. And so I lived in just a middle-class town with I'm sure everybody in the whole town went to church every Sunday. The town had about 10,000 people, and the name of it is Greenville, Pennsylvania, where, as you all know, I have a house there now, and I love to go back to it. And that town is divided, and was divided, both geographically and by religion. And there's a river that goes through the town, the Shenango River. It's a beautiful river. And also railroad tracks run by the river. And so on the west side is the Catholic part of town, and on the east side, the east end, are the Protestants. And the east end is much bigger. There are more people there, much more Protestant town. But the Catholics just have a lovely church on the West Main Hill. And I went to both the Protestant church and the Catholic church because my mother was Protestant, and that really is my background. It's overwhelmingly Protestant experience that I had in my life. But there was my dad, who was an Irish Catholic and just fun-loving sort of man. And I often went to church with him when he was in town. This is all over all the years. And so the Catholic church was called St. Michael's Church, and Daddy's name is Michael. And so whenever we walked in the entrance of the church, there's a big statue of St. Michael, he would nudge me and look like that. And then it was sort of like he was St. Michael. And but the church in my childhood, was all done in Latin. And I didn't learn a lot about Catholicism, but I just followed Daddy. I knelt on the padded bench for kneeling, and stood up and hit my heart and crossed myself, and I liked hearing the Latin, Dominus vobiscum et in tuum Deo, how the Catholic Mass begins, and the singing was kind of in Latin too, and it was lovely. So the whole church, the whole feeling of the Catholic was just pretty to me. It's like beauty. And my sister's here, she knows too, we go to midnight mass with our Aunt Barbara. All the nuns with their black habits and sort of just a certain kind of beauty and awesomeness about it. And then, though, the Methodist Church and my mother and her family were just, I want to say the word nice, but you know, even my English teacher used to say, you have to say something better than nice, that doesn't make sense. But that's the only word I can think of right now. It's just that my mother's family was just so nice. And her father was, I mean, he was a businessman, and he was into lumber stuff. But he also sometimes wrote poetry. And my grandmother too was just so nice and sweet. And we went to church every Sunday. Well, like one time my grandmother called me over to her desk and she said, I want to read this poem to you. And it was a poem she had read, and it just, the beginning of the words said, I saw God wash the world last night. It was about rain. But I've always just kind of remembered that she was so sweet, and she would just share that little poem. And then my grandfather wrote poems, and he even, he even wrote them enough that he's considered a poet of Pennsylvania. And recently Liz got one of his books off of Amazon or something, and gave it as a present to Becky for her birthday. But just the sense of goodness, and like my grandfather with his poetry, thinking about things. And one of the poems he wrote is called Why I Go to Church. And when I read that poem, it's probably been a year, when I read it, I thought, oh, for heaven's sakes, he really was spiritually developed. He could see things, and that's why he was so nice. But our family just had a very good, friendly, good way about it. That's that Protestant. And I went to church, and I didn't really like church, but I liked singing the hymns. And I don't think I ever listened to sermons, or even in the Sunday school. It meant nothing to me. It was just something that I did. And actually, it got to mean a little bit more to me when one of my best friends started to be very rebellious, and then she would make fun of things that were said. And then I'd pay attention just to think about that aspect of what had been said in church and so forth. And so that, I want to just say that when I was about 5 years old, I started to get a sense of Jesus, like the person Jesus. He became real to me. Now, I didn't think too much of it, except that, I heard that God and Jesus is with you all the time. He's always with you. He's always available, And I sort of started to feel sorry for Jesus. Like, gosh, if he's around all the time, he must be flying around or something. And so, at night, after I said my prayers with my parents, I would scoot over in my bed, and I left this space for Jesus in case he needed to take a rest. Now, I'm not the only person who ever did that. I told this to somebody, another Quaker, and he said, I used to do that too. So, who knows? But, and so I want to say that when I said my prayers, I want to talk about how that was in my family. My mother being Methodist, my father being Catholic, and that word nice. They're both so nice. So they said prayers with me. So I'm, say, 5 years old, and this, after Daddy came back from the war, our family lived as just 4 people. Then we had my little sister, Michelle. And so my mother would sit by the bed and say that now I lay me down to sleep. Pray the Lord my soul to keep. Prayer. And then she would walk. There was a little archway between our bedrooms and my parents' bedroom, Michelle's bedroom. Then my dad would walk through that archway, and he'd sit on the bed and say the Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee, blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. And this is a joke, I used to think it was Holy Mary full of grates, because, the fruit. Well, anyway, and then after the Hail Mary, then my mother came back through that little arch room, and the 3 of us said the Our Father, until the end of the Our Father, when my dad stopped talking, and my mother said, for thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. And then we all said amen together, because Catholics don't say those words at the end of Our Father. Well, I'm just telling that because isn't that sweet that that's the way they said prayers. Well, and then I just want to say that I never, ever, ever in my life had any Catholic or Protestant be mean to me about church or religion things. And so I know a lot of people who were brought up Catholic, there's a lot of, I don't know, sort of a meanness, watch out for that nun, watch out for, but because I wasn't really part of the church so much, I never, and I just don't think any of those nuns or priests in Greenville would, well, there was one priest, Michelle, okay. Father Ziola, yeah, because he wouldn't let my dad give me away when I got married. He wouldn't let my dad participate in the Methodist church service for me to get married. But luckily, my grandfather, the one that writes well, he walked down the aisle with me and gave me away, and he, being a man of his own mind, when it came to the part who giveth this woman in marriage, he said, her parents and I. So that included Daddy. And of course Daddy was involved in everything else having to do with the wedding. But Father Ziola, it's true, none of them, the family, the Catholic family, my grandparents and aunts and uncles, all came to Greenville for the wedding, and he would not let them go. So they all stayed up at the house, on the hill across from the Catholic church, and they didn't attend my wedding. But no hard feelings or anything. It was just, okay, so you couldn't go to the wedding, but hey, here's the reception, let's have a party. It was all okay. I don't know how my grandmother, how they really felt. Maybe they did have feelings about it. Because I was the first grandchild. And so there are 13 grandchildren, and I'm number 1. And then some of you may have met Johnny Mannion. He was the last of the grandchildren, and he has come out here to California sometimes. Okay, so, and then just to say that, like, during those years of World War II, I never felt any fear or anxiety about the war, even though my dad and my mother's 2 of her brothers and all my dad's other 3 brothers were all in the Army or the Marines or the Navy. But I remember my mother saying to me, the uncles and Daddy, they're all gone to the war because there is this mean man over in Europe, and they have to make him stop being mean. And that was the whole explanation of World War II for me. So I never felt worried or fearful about it, and I just loved, although I wasn't conscious of loving it, I just loved my life. It was very nice and good. And so there was this period in my life where our family left Pennsylvania and went to Tennessee. And so we lived in a little town in Tennessee that was even smaller than the one in Pennsylvania. The whole county in Tennessee had 2,000 people. And of those 2,000 people, 2 of them were black. And that was the janitor for the railroad. His name was Whitey. And his wife, who cleaned houses, her name was Pearl. And they were very nice people that my dad worked on the railroad, and so whenever I saw my dad at the railroad, he was joking or friendly with Whitey, and Whitey was very nice too, and joking and stuff. And Pearl cleaned our house twice a month. And this is just a little, seeing that Michelle, it was anyway, one of our neighbor women came into the house when Pearl was there, and Mother and Pearl were sitting at the kitchen table eating lunch. And then after that, Bee took my mother aside to say, you don't sit at a table with a black person, or called her probably a colored person. And I remember our mother saying, I don't think that's right. I am going to sit at the table with Pearl. That's not right. That's the most I ever heard of the racial issue when we lived in Tennessee. The whole town was just totally so nice, and all the people, and we lived there for 8 years and just had a wonderful time. And all that time, besides not having black people, they also had no Catholics. No. And so not even a Catholic church. And so my dad would go to the Methodist church with my mother. And a lot of the social and just all the events in the town, an awful lot of them were having to do with church kind of things. So that's the kind of background I have in terms of being brought up, in my childhood and teenage years, was, always going to church every Sunday, maybe prayer meeting on Wednesday, sometimes singing in the choir, and all the other church people being such nice people. And then I went to college, and I had to go to chapel a certain number of times per semester, and I didn't listen to the chaplain at all. Just maybe I think it was probably a little bit oppositional. I would take a book or something to read, and just had to go. And then, and then Terry Wepsic asked me to marry him, and I said, okay. And so we got married, and then we lived in New Haven, and he was going to medical school, and I went to nursing school then. This is, after college. And there at Yale, Terry had the same background I did, going to church every Sunday with his mother and dad. So at Yale, we went to the Yale Chapel on Sunday together, and there were wonderful speakers. The chaplain for the university was William Sloane Coffin Jr. I don't know if any of you know of him, but he just gave wonderful, but very civil rights and anti-war too. And we had guest speakers like Reverend Ralph Abernathy, and just powerful people who just had no doubt in their mind that civil rights was right and the way to go, and no doubt in their mind that Vietnam War was just not okay. And so I really liked that and listened. And that was sort of the setup I had when then my husband and I went to Bethesda, and then I went to the Quaker meeting there. And so that was the beginning of my spiritual journey. That was the setup for it, but the beginning of it was really when I started to come to Friends Meeting and in Bethesda. But then we moved to California, and I remember driving down Eads Avenue to find the meeting house. And then I never did really come to meeting for a few years. I think it was, we moved here in 1970 in the summer, and I came to meeting the first time was in 73 when I brought Liz. So that was the beginning, and at first I just liked the feeling of the meeting, and I liked just that friendliness and good feeling in it. It sort of fit into what had been talked about in New Haven. There were people here, you know, really caring about Vietnam War, really caring about justice and, you know, making things right in the world. And I liked the first day school and how kind the teachers were. Sometimes the teachers were Jane Peers, and sometimes Olivia, but also Marie Parker. And I just trusted and knew that these people were nice and that they treated my children in a nice way. And then, if there were friends that I didn't like what they were going to do in first day school, I just took the children with me to meeting, or I didn't bring them. And here at this meeting then, there were groups that met outside of meeting for worship. There was a women's group. And the women's group was important to me because I learned that I didn't agree with what a lot of them said. I still was like really traditional and wanting to be with my children all the time and stuff. And there were women who even straightforwardly spoke to me and said, go for your advanced degrees in your career and go for it. You don't need to be, scrubbing floors and changing diapers or whatever. But other people can do those kind of things, and you can do what's important, which is to develop yourself. And so I didn't agree. And that was nice to see that I started to get a sense of myself, like, wait a minute, I'm different here, and that's okay. And then that is one of the things that I love about Friends, is that, yes, everybody does have an ability to disagree about issues and still be friends and respectful and care about each other, and yet have very different ideas about what they're doing in life. And of course, that you can see easily now. Some people have interest in the drones, and some people have interest in making lunches for the homeless. And everybody can have their own ways of being, and some friends go to the Quaker meeting one week, and the next week they go to the Episcopal Church, and then back to Quakers. There's just such an acceptance and ease about the individual and who people are. To backtrack just a little bit, I want to say that when I went to nursing school in New Haven, something there changed my spiritual direction too, and that is the philosophy of the medical school was becoming that you trust the body more and hold back on a lot of interventions. This was especially true in childbirth, that there was a belief that, the body you could have a baby without making the woman be unconscious or unaware of what was really happening, and she would participate in the birth by knowing what was going on. And I love that, but see, that helped me see that you can change the norm. Like the medical world changed and started to trust the body and started to trust the individual. And I like that so much, and I think that has filtered over to, and I could change and not be a Methodist and a Catholic, I could be a Quaker. And you know, things in life will impact what your path has been. It can change. So as time went on, I attended a lot of like the women's groups and discussion groups, and I loved the sharing, worship sharing. It started to be for me the model of real communication. You don't have to answer to every statement that a person makes. You can just listen, and then that acceptance of the person, it's just such a good thing, and that just set very well with me. And it kind of went along with how nice everybody had been in my family. And here people are really disagreeing on some big issues and still just being loving and caring. One issue was that of, I think it's gay marriage was probably the issue. And there was just the nicest lady I practically ever met was Ann Pennery and her husband. And they were members, I guess they had been members here at La Jolla, but then they had become members at San Diego meeting. And so there was a big discussion about whether to minute the acceptance of gay marriage. And I remember Anne, you know, standing up and telling her truth, which was that, you know, she would have none of it really. It was just not about what marriage was about. And her husband was the same way. And so when it finally came to the making the minute and all the people, you know, approving it, Anne and her husband stepped aside. And that's such a powerful, you know, they were loving and caring and accepting of everything, and it was not right. They believed that to their core, and they stepped aside. And then the work has gone on with, you know, the helping. So, let's see, what else did I want to talk about? I wrote out notes, wrote them big enough so I could hopefully read them. But I think I'm sort of like going along with what I wrote on these notes. Anyway, I think that the spiritual journey was sort of, has been very slow for me, and mostly just going along with, you know, being happy that there are people that work toward the good. And I just have always listened and paid attention when people had what would be new ideas for me. And I also think that universal belief in goodness, that it's available, like when you talk about Native Americans and their belief in the Great Spirit, that, you know, I accept that, and it strengthens me to know that, you know, people from long ago and people who never went to church and stuff like that, that their belief of the Great Spirit, it strengthens me too, and I believe in the Great Spirit too, of course. And then as time went on, you know, I really started to see that there is a theology to Quakerism, and that theology can be summed up in the George Fox song, in a way, that there's a light that was shining when the world began. And that kind of goes along with the Bible, you know, in John anyway. Well, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, the Word was God, the same as in the beginning with God. Well, all things were, where's the light come in? Okay, he was in the world, and the world knew him not. He came into his own, and his own received him not. But as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God. Okay, so I see in the George Fox song that, you know, there's this ocean of darkness, the ocean of light. And he came through this darkness, the ocean of light. And the light's forever, light's free. And I'll walk in the glory of the light, said he. So, somewhere in John there it says that he was the light and the light of, he was in the light of men. The light shineth in the darkness comprehended him not, or comprehended it not. He came into his own, and his own received him not. But as many as received him, to them gave he power. And so it's easy for me to accept biblical things. I believe every bit of that, and I see the truth in it is the same thing as like what does it mean to become a son of God or a son of man? What does that mean? Well, it means you walk in the light. You believe that there is light, and you walk in that. You choose it instead of the darkness. And for people, some friends don't like Bible things, and they're against the more traditional old religion stuff, in part because they were hurt by it or it was awful for them when they were kids or something. But so I totally believe that. Friends have stood up and said, I can't stand it when people talk about God. I don't want to hear that word. I've heard friends that I totally admire and love. That's how they are. But for me, I kind of look for what fits in with the old-timey religion and then what I hear in Quakerism. And so and then I want to talk about that idea of the darkness and the light, because in my own life I've experienced both. And the darkness was horrible, really horrible. I've had some very hard things in my life that are so sad and hard for me. And I don't think I've had it as hard as a lot of people. But still, it was just terrible for me, the darkness. And as I was thinking about this spiritual journey and what to talk about, I thought, I spent a lot of time, I would think about all the darkness. And then I would just not want to think about this. And I realized that, I have it, as everybody knows, it's psychological stuff. You have a choice. You have a choice not to think about the bad stuff. And you have to stay in the light. And so that is what I do. And when I was looking at my spiritual journey thing, and I was remembering things that are dark, I just made a choice to think and remember the wonderful things of the light. And so George Fox says, that he was in the darkness, but he came to the ocean of light. And so to me that's the same thing as what it says in the Bible too, that Jesus was light, or was bringing light. And so it isn't an issue of worshiping Jesus. I don't think that's what it is, but it is following the things that Jesus taught. And then, of course, I have to say that although I would want to follow, sometimes I don't. And that, of course, is sin, and it's too bad, and I'm sorry I've ever done it. But I just want to keep going on toward the light and try not to do things that are wrong. But I have done things that are wrong. And then, moving along in this journey, I started to see, in other religions, not just Christian, but in other religions there is these same principles. And so I like to visualize the Tao, the T-A-O, Tao, that sort of a disc or circle, and then it's kind of divided, and one side is white and one is black, and then there in the black there's a little dot of white, and there in the white there's a little dot of black. And for me, right now, I think that is a symbol. It's a representation of what is reality. That there is the darkness, and there's a lot of it, and there is the light. And so I can choose to go to the light. And even when you're mostly in the light, there's that dark spot. Darn. And, but, so then I moved to believing that there's a lot of wisdom in what is right and true in ancient religions and older and other cultures. And I did experience that too, know it experientially, that I lived in Japan for 1 year and I lived in Sweden for 1 year. And so I lived in other cultures, and I experienced how okay other cultures are from the one that I, grew up in and live in now. And then that has led me to appreciate and look into not just the Tao, but like that movie Kundun. When I saw that movie, Ellie Schachter's the person who told me about it. In fact, you might have given me a copy of it. Then I started to understand about the underlying principle of compassion in Buddhism. And I just totally am uplifted by that and love it too. And so, and then, as years go by, more information about other religions has come to me. And like, for instance, now our meeting having a connection with Islam a little bit. And yeah, I love those the 5 principles of Islam. Believing there's the one God, and the praying 5 times a day, and charity was one of their pillars of Islam, and that cleanliness, being pure. And then, they have that thing about you go to Mecca. Well, and also, I'm sure a lot of Islamic people don't go to Mecca, but it can be sort of an example of something that you do with your life. You go to a pure, good place, whatever Mecca represents. What is holy? And I think I'll wind up my talk here by saying that word holy is what is important to me now too. And it comes in the form of a song also, like the George Fox song, Summing Up Quaker Theology. There's a song, it was actually written by the same person that wrote the George Fox song, Sidney Carter. And this song, the title of it is Every Star Shall Sing a Carol. I think Kathy knows. It shall sing a carol. Yeah. High above and low below. And then it says, it says, man, let's see, God above, man below, holy is the name I know. That's the ending of each of the verses. But one of the verses says, who can say what other body he will hallow for his own? I will praise the Son of Mary, brother of my blood and bone. Man, God above, man below, holy is the name I know. And so that gives me something to hold on to, that no matter what in all these religions and differences that, is expressed in various religions or philosophies, bottom line, holy is what I go for. Holy is the name I know. And I think that's about it.
Why you led singing for so long, or did I miss that?
What?
Can you tell us why you led singing? What moved you to lead singing for so long?
Oh, well, I described how Olivia used to do Family Hour. And so when Olivia didn't do it anymore, and I had music, when I was in college, I was a music major, and I played the piano all from my childhood on up and so forth. And so, and also I loved hymns from the time that I was in the Methodist church. And so I liked to do family hour here. And every Sunday I used to play the piano and do sort of the same thing Olivia would do. Ask the kids, is there anything to talk about? And then what hymns would people like to sing? And we would sing the George Fox song. When we sang it at the end, when it goes to say, and I walk in the glory of the light, said Fox. Stomp our foot, said Fox. Yeah, make a statement. And so that's why I did family hour for those many years. And why I can't do it now is because a couple of years ago I had a stroke, and I can't see like I used to be able to. However, I want to say here in public, I passed my driver's test, the I part. Okay? But you won't see me driving on the freeway. So I had a stroke, and that is preventing me from doing family hour. Although the music has been coming back to me bit by bit, and anybody who lives in my house knows that I can play like 19 measures of the Beethoven, the first, and then I don't remember the rest of it, but it's just coming back bit by bit. The first music that came back to me, I was sitting in a chair in the living room, and I suddenly started to realize I could play D, F sharp, D. It would go da da da, and that was the Scarlatti Sonata or something. And I went down and played a few measures of it, da da da, and then nothing. And then a few hours later, da 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 da, and then nothing. Now it's da 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 da. And so I'm just enjoying the music that's coming back to me. And sometimes things that happen to you that are bad, something good comes from it. So the piano tuner that used to tune our piano here, he's done something where he's gone off his rocker and he totally messed up my Steinway at home. He messed it up so bad that I had to have it totally rebuilt. And it is just beautiful. It's like the best piano in San Diego almost. So, anyway, that's... Oh, when I look over at Ellie, I think, the strength and the power that some people have to do what's right is an inspiration to me. And I know Ellie was involved in the civil rights movement. She did so much more than you would know. Can I say you spent the night with Carter King? Whatever. It used to be a secret.
No, you can't say that.
I can't say that. She made, and so I get strength from other people's stories. Like maybe I wouldn't be the first person to make a poster against Vietnam, but I would babysit for the children of the mothers who went and marched, like that. I'm a real follower, but I think the things I follow are just really good. So that's,
thank you for sharing.
We have to go, but I wish we could just spend the whole day listening to you. Thank you so much.